Hey everyone, welcome back to the first podcast of the year by the official Upper Canada College Podcast Club. Today's topic will be about our return back to school and the safety measures that have been put in place. So I'd like to welcome everyone back to the podcast. I hope we're all doing well. I think we just start with everyone's personal experience learning under the new model and how we feel about school in general. Does anyone want to start us off?
How we feel?
Yes, about
like you're talking about like the advising sessions, like the schedule, like an extra 15 minutes of school. Oh no, woe
just
is
learning
us.
under the new model. Do you think it's good? Do you think it's a lot harder? How do you feel?
I mean, who knows what Bongo is, man? I'll tell you that. Like, no one knew what Bongo was before this. I honestly am a bigger fan of Google Meet, but props to the teachers for I mean, we have cameras in the ceilings. Like, it feels like you're in the classroom if you're at home, which is a lot better than Google Meet, which is what it was last year. So I prefer that. I'm happy that they did that. The fact that there's a few asynchronous classes, I have to disagree with their opinion on that.
I think that the learning plan that the school has put in has been pretty decent, and I think that it's hard to assess the learning plan, especially during the times that we're in, especially with COVID, because it's like, what can this school really do to prevent COVID? And I think the two cohort plan was a good plan, and like on paper it's good, but I think in general it's just hard to manage hundreds of students at once to return back to school and have an effective learning plan. And I think that ultimately we all knew that it's going to result in us going back online. But I think personally that the school has made a good effort in trying to keep everything relatively safe while we return back to school.
Yeah, that's what if I can keep on going.
Yeah.
No, to be fair, it's there's basically 1,000 people at the school. Keeping a leash on 1,000 people is basically impossible. Everyone knew that there were going to be a few cases, and honestly, I'm surprised that we haven't had more so far. So far, we've only had 2 at the upper school, which is quite commendable. Although, despite that, I still believe, and the bulk of people I've spoken to believe, that at some point the school will be forced to go back to the online model, hopefully better prepared than last year because we've got the experience now. But I bet we're going to go back to online by November, so by the end of October. Some people say earlier, some people say we'll go back by term two. So yeah, there's a lot of opinions. So far though, I think it's a common consensus the school's been making a commendable effort, which is pretty nice, but I still believe it's inevitable.
Just a quick question for everyone, just because I've been asked this multiple times by the teachers. Do you prefer the 3 to 4 day classes a day every day and then you switch rather than a class every other day? Like our cycle last year was you have the same class every other day rather than every day.
Well, I feel like there are pros and cons. For me, honestly, this might be just a measure the school's been taking, but I feel like despite the fact that like all the homework's due the next day, I feel like the workload's actually a bit lighter this year than it was last year, even in spite of the online school in the last term.
I mean, compared to last year, I feel like, as everyone's been saying, the school has done a commendable job. The new model in which we just have the same classes consistently every year until we finish one unit in those classes, I feel like, especially under the current stress of staying home and, having different cohorts and needing to keep in mind all these different safety precautions is good because you get to focus on a limited number of classes for that period of time. But as Steven mentioned, having the same classes every day can be a little stale and you do have to do homework more consistently. But I think overall it was a good choice to have just these consistent classes for each unit before switching.
Yeah.
Over.
I think we can all agree it's probably better than the quadmesters. Like doing like 2 classes for like a quarter of the year and then forgetting it all by the end of the year, it's not, I think we've definitely done better than that.
Yeah, I think that I find personally that when I'm in the 3-class cycle, I feel like I'm able to like get my head in the right space more. Like I'm in the 3 classes, and I feel like if I'm having it every day, then I feel like I'm learning consistently, and I feel like I'm really getting my head in the right space for each of the classes. But I think that that's just a personal thing, and I think that's going to be different for everyone. Like some people are going to prefer having it switch every day because sometimes consistency and repetitiveness can be overwhelming or just not enjoyable. But yeah.
One thing that I really like that they did this year that I see it in like the schedule is they have 2 different sets of exams. So they have like one for like for cohort, one for the first like 4 classes, one for the second. And I think overall that I like that plan a lot. I think that's really nice because it means that it's just more convenient, I think.
I mean, my problem, I feel like I mean, great, you have more time to study for your 3 other classes. That's great. But at the same time, something that I have to keep in mind, I'm not like for myself, I'm not sure, I can't speak for all of you guys, but um, decreasing learning curve. Like if you don't have the mental fortitude to keep up and like you're not doing your French Quizlets when you're off of French, or you're not reviewing like your math like that you didn't, like you're not reviewing your math equations or like the past unit that you've done, like your knowledge on that's going to decrease. And soon enough, you might become very unfamiliar with it, or you might forget it entirely, maybe by the end of the year. So for me at least, I prefer having classes every other day because that helps with repetition. Even if there is stress, it kind of gives you motivation to continue in those classes and do well in those classes, get your work done on time rather than push it for later dates. But what they're doing now, I think, is fine because obviously, if you get homework for one class, you're going to have to do it for the next day. So there's that motivation too. But then again, there is still that month that you're not forced to do anything from the other cycle. So
Mhm.
that's the only negative that I find with that.
Yeah.
I guess.
Oh,
Yeah, Matt, you can go ahead.
okay. Also, the thing is, I think a good part about this is we get the video lessons now, which is better because I know if you miss some content, you can always just go back to the lessons since they're all recorded, and that makes it a lot easier if you like miss a class or if you kind of space out, or if you get or if you have problems with internet or other technical issues. It's just a good replacement.
Yeah, I guess just hopping off of those comments and the concerns raised by you guys, do you think that like there are any improvements that the school hasn't made but you'd like to see? Because personally, I found that there are certain aspects about the current model that are difficult for students to deal with.
Yeah.
For example, I find it a lot harder to focus when I'm learning at home.
Yeah,
And
same.
it's harder to keep up, as Nicola mentioned, with different classes, especially when you're having one set of classes 1 month and you're switching over the other. So is there anything that you still think that the school can do that they haven't done already?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, Brightspace is fine. As a club head, it gets a bit difficult reaching out to people just because I get the feeling that most people think that clubs are not mandatory. Like, no one's like, just that mentality has set into a few club members of mine. Like, some haven't even logged into my page on Brightspace. So the on and off, like in class, off class, is a bit difficult because obviously my club, it's a lot better. It's a learning club. So to have everyone in the same room would help. But I, I kind of prefer last year, like everyone, like even I'm by myself at home, I'm not in a room full of people talking around me. It's a lot more difficult to get a message by. So if there's one thing that I would suggest, there's not a solution that I can provide, but if there's one thing that I would suggest is that make it a bit easier for club heads, make it a bit easier for clubs to run, just because it's a bit distracting if you're all in the same form room. There's a lot of background noise. It's a lot harder to um, meet your club goals or do something that you want to do in that club. If you want to learn something, you might not be able to achieve that because there might be a bit of delay between the people online and in class. So if there's a better structure with that, maybe club heads could get their own room. I highly doubt that's possible, but just a bit more split up between club heads and club members would be, I feel, a bit more generous.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Building off of what Steven was talking about earlier about like the exam plan and like assessments and stuff with the new learning model, I actually think that the new learning model with having 3 classes at a time or 4 classes with TOK, I think that that actually really helps with helps enforce the assessment calendar that was supposed to be better enforced last year. Like everyone was talking about how last year it seemed like we were having unorganized test dates and stuff was piling up on each other. And that could be attributed to online learning or to a whole bunch of different factors. But I think that this year, with that 3 class model plan, I think that I feel like I have all of my tests are like free flowing and I feel like I have them at an even rate and I feel like I'm not overwhelmed all at once because all of my classes are more controlled and yeah, I think that really helps enforce that.
Yeah, with tests though, one thing I do want to see if we're talking about improvements that could be made, um, like of course, like they also have got this like, nice predictable like 2-day period for assessments and such, but a few of my classes and a few of the classes of some other people I talked to, some of my friends, their teachers just flat out ignored that and they had assessments like weeks, like literally like a week before we're supposed to have them or whatever. So I understand from the teacher's perspective that it's not easy to like jam everything into like this basically 2-day, 3-day period. I know that's hard to do, and I'm not really complaining too much because it's not a big issue in my opinion. But I definitely like a few of my courses and a few courses that I've seen from other people have just been ignoring the scheduled like assessment dates, which is a little bit concerning.
I
Yeah.
mean, but also, I mean, like that could be a negative, but you could also see that as a positive because sometimes when you have 3 huge assignments or tests in like 2 days, that could be pretty stressful. For example, one of my teachers, they made the test like a few days earlier. I think that actually wasn't that bad a decision.
Yeah, I think if like, because for my last assessments, it was like 2 essays and then like a sort of like a test all in the same period. I think if you moved like tests kind of out of that time where you'd be working on essays, it'd be a bit better. Like if you get the test done with right before or right after the essays, it'd probably give you a lot more time to focus. So I don't know, maybe
Are there such thing as hell weeks anymore? Like like is that
Well,
term
you only have
favorite
3 assessments
has
now, so
yeah, like I feel like that term's like totally like blown out of the water now. Like there's no such
Well,
thing.
it's very hard for one to happen because at least my personal definition was having more than 3 assessments in like a week. Except there's only 4 classes, so you could argue that there are hell weeks, but I really don't think there are anymore.
This is just the school's way. They've gotten so much backlash about Hell Weeks. This is just their solution.
I mean, realistically, we are in the IB, so technically we could just consider it a hell year.
Plandemic. What?
Oh.
Well, I do think it is important to remember that all of us here are in year 11, which is an extremely crucial year for university applications, and we all know that we have to have important commitments this year. But with this whole COVID pandemic and the entire restructuring of the learning model, some of that might change. So, how do you guys feel about like how the school is accommodating to your needs as an year 11 student and your future goals?
I mean, totally disregarding UCC right now, but other universities, they notice this. Like for students like us, they notice that standardized testing, like some Ivy League schools, I think Cornell is, and Brown are two really big Ivy League schools who are now not like it's not mandatory to take these standardized tests like the ACT or SAT. So like as the year progressed, like as months progressed, so many more universities came out to this for 2021, 2022 students. Standardized testing wasn't mandatory anymore. So uh, I mean, as a year 11 student who's trying to do the best that he can to get into the university that he wants, that's at least a positive for me.
Yeah, I think that's a good step on the university's part, like towards the future of like just not making it as like dependent on 1 or 2 things. But I think that the regarding to us as year 11 students, I think that it's hard to meet all of the goals of universities and stuff because like obviously lots of high-end universities, top tier universities are looking for extracurriculars, volunteering, uh, all of that stuff, being a part of sports, participating in all of these other extra clubs. And I think that with COVID, it's become a lot more difficult, especially with like the new club plan at school, which allows you to only join 2 or 3 clubs and has like very spread apart meetings, or like sports programs you can't really go to as many practices as you could before, or like all of these new problems that wouldn't have happened without COVID. And I think that I don't know if there should be steps made in the university's side of things or our side of things as a high school to make changes like that. But I think that that could have an effect on the future of university applications for our grade specifically, especially with COVID.
I don't know. Like, do you think that they would really be like that strict that they know that we're in a pandemic, but they'd still be like, well, you didn't do any clubs or anything. I think they'd have to kind of be a little bit more generous with
Yeah, so
yeah.
I mean, building off of those comments from Joey, from Nicola, from Francesco, I think it is important to realize that universities are considering that we are in a pandemic and that we might not be able to do all the extracurriculars we plan to do, or like do all the in school clubs that we plan to do. But compared to other schools, because UCC is a private school and we are expected to have an IB education and a higher end education, do you still think that we are being provided like better opportunities to achieve those goals in the pandemic?
Most definitely, definitely. There's not many statements that you can use to contradict that. Like UCC, the fact that it's running right now is, if you think about it, kind of a miracle. If you're seeing what's going on in public school systems and around your local area, stuff like that. But UCC, cross country is still going. That's what I know. There's football practices, there's soccer practices. Sports aren't even running in some other schools, especially in Etobicoke. So stuff like that really gets you thinking that, like, I'm thankful for being at a school that can provide opportunities like this, even during a global pandemic.
I mean, considering what I've heard from my other friends, UC is actually doing really well in like addressing, because, well, first of all, considering some of the education in other schools, I can tell, or according to my sources, they've deteriorated quite a bit. That doesn't actually seem to be the case at UCC, which is very good. So we're still getting the same quality of education. Second, apparently they also decrease their school times by a lot, up to the point where they're probably only learning 2 or 3 hours a day, which is concerning. When you're in high school, you're in grade 11, you're about to go to university, and you're only getting 3 hours of education a day, if not that. So I think that on this basis, UC is really consistent in terms of, you know, providing for its students.
I mean, this kind of goes back to your other question, like, what solutions do you have? Like, do you think UCC is doing anything bad? I mean, the app that we use is fine, but it makes it difficult to get into the school sometimes, because I've had experiences where I'm waiting 10 minutes to access my surveys. I'm not sure if anyone else has this issue, but I feel like if there's anything that UCC can improve on, it's that. But at the same time, I'm not sure how many other schools even use an app like that. I'm not sure if any students are even denied entry at other schools, or if there's or honesty around COVID around other schools. So, I mean, there's like a better solutions offered, but we technically do have a solution that other schools don't.
I mean,
Yeah.
as Francesco, you can go.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, like my dad's a teacher, and I think what he said that his school was doing is they have some teachers at the entrance who check like all the kids manually. Don't quote me on this, but I think that's what's happening with some schools. And so as a result, like classes are really being pushed back. So yeah, like Reach is even if you're waiting like 10 minutes for a survey, I think it's a lot better, a lot more efficient than what some other schools have got.
Yeah, well, we recently found out that two people at UCC got tested positive. Several other schools in Toronto have also been closed down due to internal outbreaks of the virus. How do you think that actually is going to impact the way the school learns, and in the long run, how do you see UCC adapting to that?
Um, well, as I've already said, I don't imagine we're going to be doing this hybrid in-class online system for that much longer. As I've already said, I predict, I think we're going to go back to fully online by November. But yeah, so I think considering our position, we're in Toronto. It's a huge urban center, the biggest one in Canada. Basically one of the hotspots for the virus. I don't think we're gonna have that much more time going to the school. I think the school will be forced to shut down. Although, yeah, because like so many people already have to isolate. Like, of course, I'm not gonna like reveal the identities or anything about the two people with the virus, but I personally have had to isolate, and I know a lot of my friends have had to isolate too. And it's just eventually a huge portion of the school is going to be isolating, almost to the point where there's no point in having in-person classes anymore. So I just think that try as they might, and I definitely believe they're trying. I think it's a losing battle. We're not going to be able to keep on doing in-person classes.
It's interesting that you actually bring that up, Stephen, because you mentioned that there's going to be a point where so many people are isolating that it becomes irrelevant for people to go to school. Do you think that's going to be the eventual reason why school's just going to shift on to online, or do you think there's going to be an actual larger factor that causes a shutdown?
Honestly, I think the shutdown's going to be. I think that might be the reason for the shutdown. But I think the reason for the shutdown will just be a huge number of cases because I'm well actually I've got a funny story actually about people just not being there. Is that in my physics class, I'm in my physics class, everybody but one student like is isolating. So there's only one on my like day in the school. There's one person in the physics class. Like everyone else is isolating already. So you can already sort of like see the impacts of this. And so to get back to your point, I think it might be the reason. It's going to definitely be. Well, I mean, because if they have enough cases, that means a huge portion of the school is going to be isolating. So I think that might be the reason.
Um, Also talking about like Stephen's point about one students not being in class, there's also the discussion about teachers not being in class too, who have also been exposed to the infected students. Like for two of my classes actually already, both both teachers or they're both in self-isolation right now, and that kind of arises a problem of the people in class. Does that affect focus in the room? Like, are people actually contributing in the room? Uh, like, there's also issues that arrive, not just the students not being in class, but the teachers. They're both totally different issues, but if they both come together like they are recently, like I think there's 8, 9 teachers out right now self-isolating, and there's more than 40, 50 students now self-isolating as well, with only 2 students. It's going to be an issue for not just students, but also teachers as well, which is not the best.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's also important to not only look at the student body and within the school, but also to look at what's happening with COVID outside of the school. Because obviously, as you've seen in the past, the schools had to close down in March and April and stuff, even when there were no cases within the school. So I think it's important to not only look at within the school, because obviously that is a large contributing factor, but as you can see in the COVID cases numbers per day within Canada, it's rising and rising, and it seems like we're gonna go into another lockdown. And I think that it's important to not only look at inside the school, but also outside the school, because what happens outside of the school also influences what happens inside, and all of that stuff.
Yeah, just to kind of circle back to what Nicholas said about teachers. I had a coding class a little while ago where our teacher wasn't there because there was a suspicion that like his son might have had COVID. He just joined us online. But but it was fine. Like we all just joined the Bongo page, and he just instructed us from there. We had a substitute in the class who really they were just there to take attendance. But yeah, like the class went pretty well, and there were only 4 people in class, but I still feel that even if the teacher isn't like personally there, I think we'll still be able to get a lot of work done. Especially I think because there'll probably be substitutes in the class. So I'm a bit hopeful, at least with regards to like teachers.
Yeah, I feel like in-person learning is still more beneficial, at least to me, than online learning. I find that it's a lot more productive as a student, and even as a teacher who are teaching lessons, I think in-person is a much more effective way to teach. At the same time, I do think it's important to stay on the safe side. If COVID numbers do rise, if there is an outbreak in the school, it is important to realize that maybe we shouldn't be having in-person lessons.
What about the students that have to take the TTC and public transit?
Yeah, that's just a whole new level of risk because then there's all bets are off, really.
Yeah, because I mean, last year, I mean, for the past 5 years that I've been at the school, I've been taking the TTC, and this is the first time that I've actually been driven to school almost daily. Like, it's a luxury, but at the same time, not a lot of other students have that luxury. There's still those handful of students that have to take public transit. I'm not sure if they're quote unquote threat for the school, health wise, but I mean, it's an issue to see students still have to uh, fall back on the public transit now.
Yeah, I know someone who isn't. I'm not gonna obviously name them, but I know someone who isn't actually going to school because they don't have a way to get to school. Like they don't want to take the TTC, obviously, and they can't really get driven, so they're just doing all at home. So yeah, I think it is gonna be. It probably is a factor for at least a couple people at the school, which is unfortunate because like Albert said, in-person learning is, I think, a lot more beneficial.
When was the last time that any of you have taken the subway or any
A
sort of
long
public
time
transit?
ago.
Eons
ago.
ago.
If you
I
dropped me
like-
on the TTC, I'd get lost and die.
Once upon a time.
Yeah.
I guess we can just top off this podcast with a look into the future. So how do you guys think that, given all these circumstances under the status quo, how do you guys think next year will look like? How do you think the year after that will look like? And when do you think we as students, teachers, the school body, when do you think we can realize a sense of normal again?
It's a
I
tough
don't think
question, Albert.
normal will be for a really long time. Because considering like how bad this virus has been, and just in general, like how much people's lives have changed, I think our standard, like I don't think we're ever gonna go back like to the old days to like 2019. I think our definition of normal will just change because it'll be if we do go back to that kind of normal, it'll still be a really long time considering all these events.
Yeah, we're going into flu season. I'm not putting any dates. I'm not putting my money on any dates that we're gonna be all back in school. Like I can't say, oh yeah, March that month. That's gonna be the month, you guys. That's gonna be the month. Like if I had to take any sort of guess, this entire year kind of feels like a write-off to me. I mean, my brother goes to Queen's University. Queen's has a bunch of their own cases. They said after winter break, it's just going to be online. I feel like that's going to be the same with us. If we do make it to winter break, I don't think the school is going to let us do this hybrid thing anymore. So I feel like we'll make it to exams, whether on hybrid or all online, but maybe next year there's some light.
Yeah, like I think it depends on if we can get a vaccine out. And I'm hopeful that like soon we'll have it ready and that like by next year we'll be ready to go back to like a mostly in-person thing.
Yeah, but like we're already pushing that date anyways with the vaccine. Like we're already skipping some safety concerns with that. Like I know I'm going to get the vaccine. I'm just not sure if I want to be the first wave of people to get it.
Yeah, well, there's this whole like when you look at the pandemic, it's hard to make any predictions at all because you don't know what's going to happen in 3 weeks from now. 3 weeks from now, the whole world could be infected with COVID, and we couldn't rule that out as a possibility because it's so unpredictable. And when it comes to that, I think it's like, for example, when I was looking at the school plan at the beginning of the year before we started school, and I looked at how this was until June, and how this whole hybrid learning plan was all the way for the entire school year, I was asking myself, how could the school make a plan like that if we don't even know what's going to happen in a month from now? So I think that it's definitely hard to plan for the future, especially in the time of COVID, because it's so unpredictable. And then, yeah, I think it's also really difficult, especially with vaccines, because obviously we're a bunch of teenagers and kids, and we're not at like the highest risk for getting COVID or like getting extremely sick or have high mortality rates. So that puts us at the later time period for getting our vaccines and stuff. So I think that there's a large number of factors that affect what happens in the future. And I think it's too hard to tell what will happen. And even if we do know that the vaccine could be coming soon, it still could be a while till we come back and everything, quote unquote, normalizes, because especially since we're all kids and like we're not the highest priority at the moment.
What? What? It's a podcast.
Oh, okay.
We're putting this in.
All right, thank you everyone for watching this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please leave a
Don't forget to like, comment,
Albert,
subscribe,
you did it.
donate.